Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where you meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg. Hello there, Shipping Podcast listeners. This is the 60th episode of the Shipping Podcast. Imagine that. 60 episodes. That is 60 people who has given me their time to sit down and talk about what their passion is, which also happens to be my passion. That is the shipping industry. 60 hours of listening to maritime professionals. It's amazing. It's been such an interesting journey, and I never thought I would have so many listeners. I have just come back from Nor-Shipping in Oslo. That was amazing. 35,000 delegates for an entire week of maritime and shipping. So many amazing speakers, so many interesting people, and so little time. I realized a long time ago that conferences like Nor-Shipping is not a place where I can do some interviews, because people do not find the time to sit down and talk to me. However, of course, I've got a few ones up my sleeve. You will be amazed, I promise you. So, what is better in this Nor-Shipping week than to have a Danish lady on the podcast? I will be introducing you to Anne Steffensen. She is the Director General and CEO of the Danish Shipowners Association. I sat down with Anne on the 24th of January this year in her office in Copenhagen. It's an impressive office. If you haven't visited that building, you should. It's really, really something else. So, without further ado, this is Anne Steffensen for you. Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Anne Steffensen. I'm the CEO of the Danish Shipowners Association, where you are sitting right now.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for, wanting to talk to me. I'm very pleased. Thank you.
What is your background?
Well, I actually have a special background for being in shipping now. I finished my studies back in 1990, and then I immediately after joined the Danish Foreign Service. And I spent 23 years in the Foreign Service until I finished my career there in London as the Danish Ambassador to the UK. And then I jumped into this job as CEO of the Danish Shipowners Association, and I haven't looked back.
I understand that. So you got the bug now. You have got the shipping bug.
I have definitely got the shipping bug, and I think that maybe I've had it all along because I've always been very fond of this sector. When you're an ambassador or when you're a diplomat, what you do is you're looking after all the different interests of Denmark in all the different sectors. So shipping has also been part of what I've been working with as a diplomat. And I always like the people in this industry. I think the people have, they're highly skilled, they have good competences, they have a global outlook, and they are generous. They are very generous people. So I've always liked the people here. So it has, in a way, been a little bit like coming home.
So what is your responsibility? What do you do as head of the Shipowners Association?
Well, first of all, it's a leadership job. I mean, it's taking care of the association and not least all our members in order to make sure that they have the best possible framework conditions for doing what they are best at, running shipping companies in Denmark and operating their companies and their ships out of Denmark. So that is my, I think, first and foremost obligation as CEO here is to make sure that my members strive and can do what they're best at, being good ship owners.
How many members do you have?
If you put it all together, in this house, we actually are administration for all 3 ship owners associations in Denmark. So I have 98 members, and I organize about 99% of the tonnage being operated by Danish ship owners.
Because you have grown a lot. I mean, on the global base.
Yes, fortunately we have grown over the years. We are the 8th largest shipping nation in the world when it comes to operated tonnage. And we are number 14th in terms of Danish flag.
Because I remember back in the old days, before you were before you were responsible.
Yes.
I remember when you set up the Blue Denmark.
Yes.
And how that came around.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the Danish Maritime Fund, I don't know, and what is the Blue Denmark today?
Yeah. I think that the Blue Denmark concept actually came out of a wish to be much more visible as an industry in Denmark. Shipping has always been in the Danish DNA, but there has been a time where other sectors and other industries became more sexy among young people. So some 8-10 years ago, the different parties of the Blue Denmark decided that they wanted to do a campaign in order to get young people interested in joining this industry. So they made a campaign called World Career, and the tag for that, if you like, was the Blue Denmark. And the Blue Denmark is really not only ship owners, but ship owners are the backbone of the Blue Denmark, but it's also sub-suppliers, technology suppliers, it's service providers, it's education institutions, and it is, of course, also authorities. So the Danish Maritime Authority is also part of the Blue Denmark. So the Blue Denmark is a concept of everything that has to do with maritime industry in Denmark, and we work closely together, not only in terms of attracting young talent to our industry, but also in terms of getting the right competences, the right skills, working with institutions, educational institutions, in order to make sure that our education here for young people going into the Blue Denmark is second to none.
I'm impressed, so that's why I'm asking.
Thank you.
So what is your best advice then? How could shipping in general be more visible? Because we are often looked upon as the Cinderella industry. No one knows about us.
No, that's true. And I think that's one of the challenges of the shipping industry. In this association, we have worked very much with what I would call storytelling about what we do. And I think it's all about storytelling, making sure that people not only understand, but has an image or a picture of what we're doing in this industry. And we have sort of 3 taglines, if you like, in our storytelling. First of all, we have a story about how we create value to the wider society, not only to ourselves as ship owners, but how we create value in terms of creating jobs, but also, being facilitator of global trade, making sure that also people in less rich countries of the world have access to services that can get their products into the world market, that sort of thing. So creating value is one part of it and showing it. Secondly, it's also making sure that you tell the story about us being a global industry, not just being local in a Danish context. We are, of course, also local, but being global in terms of working across borders and across the world, in all continents. And last but not least, it's of course also making sure that people know and that we are visible about being an industry that takes responsibility, that we are at the forefront on all the topics which are also top of mind in the general public, among politicians, but also among young people. For example, climate change, recycling of ships, other environmental issues, which is, I think, much more at the forefront of the mind of young people than we sometimes think. So creating value, being global, taking responsibility as an industry is how we can show what we are here for.
Hooray!
Yes,
I'll cut that out.
Yeah, but the thing is that in our industry, people hardly ever see ships. They don't see the ships that are 95% of the time outside the borders of Denmark. They know ferries, of course, but they don't understand the nature of what we do in shipping in terms of being global and facilitating global trade. So I think that you need to tell the stories of how you actually, work, how you think, and how you do as a shipping community, not only locally, but also globally.
And we have a tendency to speak to each other. Who do you speak to outside shipping about these things?
You're absolutely right, and I think you are pinpointing one of the weak points of the shipping industry, that we tend to be so enclosed and so much full of ourselves that we sometimes forget that we can actually also learn from other sectors. that we can reach out to other parts of the community with whom we can, work and also strive to become not only better as an industry, but also make a better impact on the wider society. So in this association, we spend quite a lot of time working with NGOs where we share common values. For example, we have worked closely with the Ecological Council in Denmark in terms of showing that not only that we take the responsibility in terms of reducing sulfur emissions, but also working with them in terms of getting authorities to take upon themselves a serious role in making sure that enforcement is in place. So I think there's a lot of issues where you can work with NGOs, where you can go hand in hand with them, where we sort of serve the same objectives. Sometimes we disagree. I mean, this is not a honeymoon kind of thing, but quite often I think you can find common ground by working with the people outside the industry. It also goes when you look into the future and you can see that there's a lot of things happening in the technological world which will also have an impact on shipping. I think it's really important that we as an industry not only look towards ourselves to find the solutions and to find the new business models of tomorrow, but that we look into the automobile industry who've been there before in terms of environmental regulation, for example, that we look at the airliners and see how they have done things, that we look at the IT sector and see how they have come up with different solutions in terms of platforms or whatever, that we look beyond our own industry to be inspired and get as much as we can into our own industry and develop from there.
Can I say I love you?
Sorry, yeah, I get carried away.
No, great, it's great. Because I think sometimes, we complain that no one knows about us, but yes, we do not dare to take that step outside our own rank to speak with other people. Since I started this podcast, I get so many young people or people outside the shipping industry reaching out to me and saying, I have a good idea, or who do I speak to with this and that? That's an enigma for me. We complain, but we don't do anything about it. Who should do anything about it?
Well, I think that we all should. I think it is always very easy to pinpoint or point fingers at others and say that you should do this and you should do that. I think that we all carry a responsibility to reach out to people beyond our own industry, whether it's young people, it's people outside our borders, it's people in other sectors. So I think we all carry a responsibility, and I actually think that one of the ways to do that is also to engage in other debates which are not directly linked to shipping. For example, now we have a world which is changing the rules of the game in the way that globalization is no more sort of the big positive thing. It's being challenged. You have Trump coming into office in the US, or has come into office in the US. You have Brexit. You have a lot of people in the European public who are critical towards being open markets, critical towards trade, and so on. I think that we as a shipping industry should really engage in these kind of discussions about how do we create jobs, how do we make sure we take care of those who, for some reason or another, are not going to be in competitive industries anymore. How do we make sure that we educate young people into other sectors when some sectors are being erased because of competition from Asia and whatever. That kind of sort of public role in discussing the big challenges that are not only for the shipping industry, but are also for, challenges for the wider society. So I think engaging is really something that we should take upon ourselves as an industry, but also as individuals working in this industry. And it's tough, because if you're out there and you stick your nose out, you always have a risk that somebody's going to chop it off, but you have to dare.
I agree. And it's so much more fun to do that.
That's true.
Than to stay in the same box.
That's true. Because we also have to remember we are shipping people, we are business people, but we're also citizens. And being a citizen, also gives you a responsibility to participate.
So what's at the top of your agenda now, besides everything you've been talking about? I know the environmental issues and so on.
Well, on top of my agenda is two things. First of all, it is, of course, to make sure that I take care of my members who are challenged now by difficult markets. I can't do anything about the market situation, but what I can do is to try to make sure that we as an association work for the best possible framework conditions for them to strive in the competition. So that is the first thing. And the second thing is that I think that what is on top of my mind is what we just talked about. To be an association, to be an industry which is outward looking, which is daring to participate in the wider society, and who are trying to take responsibility for some of the issues which are not only important to our own industry, but are important to the societies that we are part of. And that is, for example, climate change. I mean, now we have been discussing how we can reduce CO2 emissions since the Paris Agreement was ratified. Now it's time for shipping to come into the ball game, if you like, and make sure that we also take our responsibility and find ways where we can, in the next 10, 30, 50, 100 years can go towards zero emission of CO2. So I think that kind of responsibility is on top of my mind.
What about this fourth industry revolution that is happening right now?
Technology
How do you think that will have an impact?
Well, I'm absolutely certain that this is going to impact our industry as well. I think we have already seen that technology is going to become a bigger part also of the way that our business models are being put together. I think that we need to be aware of what is happening in terms of technology, not only changing business model, but also technology which is changing the society at large. There's been this whole discussion about how much of the jobs disappearing in some of the mature economies are disappearing because of free trade and competition, or how many of the jobs are actually disappearing because we are putting in automation, robotization, and so on. And I think that kind of sort of trends and changes in the way our workplaces and society is developing is something which I think we also should take into account in the shipping industry. And there's been a lot of discussions about specific technologies, being a game changer for the shipping industry. There's been talk about 3D printing. There's been talk about, the fact that you are taking back production, reshoring production, which has been moved from Europe to Asia, for example. And I think that all these things we have to take into account. But I think the major trends of how workplaces are being changed is the biggest issue.
How do you think digitalization will have an impact on the shipping industry?
I think it will have a huge impact in the sense that I think all shipping companies have to look into the way that they not only have their business models in terms of how they will be able to stay in close contact with their customers in the future, not being taken over by some sort of platform where you can buy the services without being in direct contact with your customers, or where the customers are not in direct contact with you as a shipping or ship owner company. So I think in that respect, I think it's going to have an impact on shipping companies. But I also think that there's a lot of advantages to be taken from shipping companies in terms of having a much closer relationship between what is happening onshore and what is happening at sea, much closer cooperation between the crew running the ship and the people onshore in terms of how can you run this more efficiently, how can you be in closer contact, what can be done onshore, which is now being done on the ship and so on. So I think that in that respect, I think digitalization has a lot of opportunities also for ship owning companies. And I definitely think that most shipping companies today will have to look into getting other competences into their organizations than they did before. Previously, people came into the shipping companies when they were young, and they were being disciplined and educated and taught all the things that they needed in order to, make the deals, so to speak, and make the contracts. I think now you will need to have people who can do that, of course, and being good commercial people. But I also think you need to try to get other competences, young people, old people who have IT skills, who have, been in other sectors, who have seen other ways of doing things. So I think that in that respect, I think that the whole technological development and digitalization is something where you also have to tap into those competences and get them into your own organization.
So that will also have an impact on the male-dominated industry that we are in right now. There will be no gender issue.
I think it will take some time before we have solved the gender issue in our industry, to be honest with you. But I think that the fact that you are getting different kind of competences in will make a more diversified environment and also influencing the imbalance that we have right now in terms of gender. But I'm actually thinking that gender is one way of looking at diversity, but I think there's much more to diversity than gender. I think it's also about having, diversity is also about having different kind of skills, different nationalities, people from different cultures, gender, of course. So I think that the whole opening up, I think, in many ways of our industry will create a more diversified environment, which will also lead to more women.
I agree with you. I always agree with my guests. I don't know why. But I mean, what you are talking about, the digitalization and what impact that will have. But if you look upon the industry, it's so segmented. There are so many small business owners, small, but they have 5 to 10 ships, and usually it's family owned, so it's the son or the daughter taking over. How will they keep up with that? I mean, it's easy for the big ones, the dragons,
yes,
to have a digitalization
that's true.
Process or strategy. So I think it will be hard for the smaller ones, and there are so many of them.
Yes. No, I think you're right, and I think that maybe we will be looking into a completely different, not a completely because this will take time, but we will be looking into a different structuring and less fragmented industry if we look 10, 15, 20 years ahead. I think we will need to see, also because of the market conditions and because of the margins in running a ship owner's business are becoming so small, and I think we will see consolidation. So maybe you will have fewer sort of smaller companies and some bigger companies in the future. And maybe you will also see a change in business models in the sense that some of the big ship owning companies, and with ship owning companies, I mean companies who actually own their ships, I think some of them will move from being ship owners into being ship operators, and they will probably, in charter more tonnage from the outside, as some of them already do. And maybe that will be sort of the future for smaller businesses who are just owning the ships. I think it's becoming a more difficult world in terms of being a small ship owner in the future.
As we can see on land, I mean, like lorries or trucks.
Yes.
Used to be small owners.
Exactly. Mom and pop companies, yes.
Yeah, and they have consolidated, and now they are big companies owning the asset.
That's true. They talk so much about asset light or asset heavy, as it's been in many companies previously. And I can hear now that they also talk about, it's not a question about being asset light or heavy on assets. It's being asset right. It's being able to find the exact proportion between what kind of ships and how many do you own yourself and how many are you in chartering. And finding that right balance, I think, is something that a lot of companies are struggling with.
So how do you see the future for shipping in general? How do you see it? What is your vision on that?
I'm a born optimist. So I'm very optimistic when it comes to the future of shipping. I think that there will, many years looking forward, will be a lot of demand for our services. I still think that shipping has a very strong role to play in terms of facilitate trade between some of the, not only the mature economies, but also trying to being part of integrating some of the weaker countries, less developed countries of the world into to the world economy. So I think that there's a lot of positive things going on, which will continue to make sure that shipping will be a growing industry. I do think there are some, difficult things happening in the world, which can definitely be a game changer. I sincerely hope that there'll be a continued support for open markets, for free trade, for globalization in the compassionate way of globalization, that we, yes, continue to have integrated economies, but still at the same time also try to take care of those who are losers of globalization. Because I think one of the things that we have not been good enough at taking care of also in our own industry is to recognize the fact that the winners of globalization is all of us who are getting cheaper consumer goods, who are, transporting trade. And there are also some people who are losing out because their jobs are being moved from one country or one local economy to another. And we have to be able to also address those downsides of globalization in a much better way than we have been in the past.
Did you have a role model growing up?
That's a good question. I don't think so, no. Not really. A role model? No, not really.
But you are a role model now. How do you view that?
I don't know whether I'm a role model, but I am conscious of the fact that there are so few women who have, taken upon themselves the responsibility of also being a leader and showing leadership, that I know that there will be young women and hopefully also young men looking at me and trying to not only understand, but also trying to be inspired by what I have done. So in that respect, I hope I can be a role model. But growing up, I didn't have a role model as such. I had very good parents. I still have them, thank God. And my parents have been very conscious about not only giving me a lot of freedom in choosing what I wanted to do, but also been giving me a lot of confidence in being able to do what I want. So I think that is probably the best gift you can give to your kids, is to make sure that they are robust, that they can tackle the world. They're not being sort of, you're not being a curling parent, that's what we talk about in Denmark, but that you're making them robust, that they can tackle the world and all the small and big problems they meet, and that they have the confidence in believing that they can do what they want, be what they want. And I think that my parents have been very good at giving me all three things.
Who would you be interested in listening to in the shipping podcast? Who do you think I should interview the next?
I think that you should ask Henriette Thyssen, who is a CEO of Svitzer, who have just come in as CEO of Svitzer last October. So she's a woman who have been able to make it all the way, and she's a very inspiring and very strong woman whom I would like to hear what she's thinking about, not only her own job and her own career, but also how she sees the future of the shipping industry.
I will try and do that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time, Anne. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you got at least a feeling of where I come from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. You are an advocate for the shipping industry, and I think you're doing a great job. As I mentioned before, I've just come back from Nord Shipping, where I met so many friends and previous guests and listeners who approached me to tell me what they think about the podcast. I am so happy when people approach me in real life and talk to me about my podcast, because usually I sit here and I talk to myself. I have no idea how this lands within you. I just speak. During the last month, in May, I have been participating in I would call it a course or a class, or I don't know. I've been participating in the E-League, which is something that Elsie Escobar has actually started. It's 22 women from, I would say the globe, but it's 20 women from the USA, one from Canada and me. And we have been taught how to take our podcasts to the next level. It's been so much fun. I have been learning everything about Slack and Trello and Voxer, and if you're too old to understand what I'm talking about, maybe you could Google it. Or if you know what I'm talking about, I love it. Anyhow, in this work that I have been doing with my podcast and strategizing and thinking on how to develop things, there was also an appraisal. I can remember when I had appraisals when I was young, and I can remember when I have given them to someone else. It's a little bit like going into the very heart and soul of what you're doing, and you're letting someone in there to poke around and to come out and give you new ideas and new perspective of what you're doing. I have got some new perspectives, but I haven't put them in place yet. I'm still digesting. But I was challenged to further develop the channels I use for communication around my podcast. So, during the Nord Shipping, I have been testing Insta Stories and Facebook Live. I must say that after 3 days, I was exhausted.
It was too much, and I didn't want to share the same things in all channels, of course, because I'm building my little ecosystem here of sharing what I want you to know about my podcast in different channels. You can check it out and let me know what you think, because that could only help me to become even better. I have also tested to send an audio message to a conference where I couldn't find the time to attend. I enclosed a PowerPoint presentation with it to showcase all the 60 guests. That PowerPoint presentation accompanied my audio message, and I have heard back that it was a success, even though that I have now made myself redundant. I don't even have to travel to conferences anymore. I could just send an audio message and a PowerPoint presentation. No, I think it's fun to test this. Audio is so different from any other media you can use. And I like to play around with it and see what happens. Well, I hope you liked the interview with Anne. I have a few more Danish guests coming up. But I have to go back to the drawing board. I got so many plans in my head, I need to take them down. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out. Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast where the maritime professionals are talking about their everyday job.